The sun hammered down on the high plains with a cruelty that turned the air to brass and the earth to iron. Cordelia Hayes sat in the back of the freight wagon's spine, straight despite the ache that ran from her neck to her hips, hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone bone white. She tried not to look at the man driving, tried and failed. Pete Grogan. Poison Pete, they called him, though no one ever said why to his face. He had the kind of smile that belonged on a man counting coins over a fresh grave, the kind that never quite reached his eyes. Beside him sat the man she had called father for 11 years. Roland Hale. Clean-shaven even out here where dust coated everything, shirt pressed, coat brushed dark, as if the wilderness itself would not dare dirty him. As he pulled a leather pouch from his coat to check its contents, sunlight caught on something at his left hand, a silver ring on his smallest finger, heavy and ugly, carved with the head of a snarling wolf. The detail was fine, almost delicate, but the image was brutal. Mouth open, teeth, bared eyes, empty. Hale twisted it absently as he counted a habit she had seen 1,000 times, but never thought to question. The motion was practiced unconscious, like a man whirring a rosary or clicking the hammer of an unloaded gun. He had not spoken to her since dawn, had not even glanced back. "How much further?" Cordelia asked, hating the tremor in her voice. Hale turned his head just enough for her to see his profile. Sharp nose, thin lips, the kind of face that gave nothing away. Far enough. 2 words. A door slamming shut. Cordelia swallowed hard and looked away, fixing her gaze on the horizon where heat made the skies shimmer like water that was not there, that would never be there no matter how far you walked. She had tried to run last night, had packed her mother's locket, the little money she had saved from mending shirts for the ranch, hands a spare dress that was more patches than cloth. She had made it as far as the stable had her hand on the gate latch, when Coyle, one of Hale's men, a wiry piece of work with dead eyes and quick fists, caught her by the arm and dragged her back across the yard hard enough to leave bruises that still throbbed. Hale had not shouted. He never shouted. He had simply locked her in her room, turned the key with that same calm precision he brought to everything, and told her to be ready at first light. Something in his tone had made her blood turn to ice. Now she rode towards something she could not name but deeply feared. The wagon jolted over rocks and ruts, wheels creaking, and with each mile the knot in her stomach grew tighter, harder, until it felt like a stone lodged beneath her ribs. She thought of her mother Anna and the way she had looked in those final days. Pale as candle wax hands, shaking so hard, she could not hold a cup without spilling eyes wide with a terror that went deeper than sickness, deeper than pain. The doctor had called it fever, had shaken his head and said there was nothing to be done, that some illnesses simply could not be fought. But Cordelia had seen the way Hale stood in the doorway of the sick room, watching, saying nothing, his face as calm and untroubled as if he were observing the weather. She had been 8 years old then, old enough to remember but too young to understand. Now at 19, the pieces were beginning to fit together, sharp-edged and ugly. The dreams had started 3 months ago, always the same. Her mother lying in bed, body convulsing back, arching off the mattress lips, forming words Cordelia could never quite hear over the sound of her own ragged breathing. And then her mother reaching out with one trembling hand to press something into Cordelia's palm, something small and soft, worn with years of handling. The old rag doll Cordelia had loved as a child, the one with button eyes that had come loose on one side and yarn hair that her mother had sewn herself, patient and careful in the lamplight after long days of work. "Keep it safe," her mother would whisper in the dream, her voice barely audible like wind through dry grass. "Keep it close. Promise me." Cordelia had woken from that dream 3 times now, always gasping, always reaching for something that was not there, her hand closing on empty air. She had dismissed it as grief, as memory twisted by time and longing. But now, riding in this wagon toward an uncertain fate, she wondered if it had been something else. A message, a warning, a lifeline thrown across the years. The old rag doll, where was it now? She had hidden it years ago before Hale moved them from the old homestead to his ranch after the funeral. Hidden it in the stone-lined cellar beneath the burned-out shell of the house, wrapped in oilcloth, to keep it dry tucked into a corner where the light never reached. She had been afraid Hale would throw it away, afraid he would burn it like he had burned so many other things, her mother's dresses, her mother's letters, her mother's books. Anything that reminded him of Anna he destroyed. Or so she had thought. Now she wondered if it had been something else. If he had been trying to erase evidence. What if her mother had known? What if she had hidden something inside the doll, some piece of proof that would make sense of the senseless Cordelia, clenched her hands tighter, and said nothing? They reached Tolliver's Rest by mid-afternoon, when the sun was at its worst, and the air shimmered with heat that made everything look unreal, like a mirage that would vanish if you blinked. It was not a town, barely even a settlement, just a sagging building with a hand-painted sign that had faded to near illegibility, and a handful of horses tied to a rail that looked ready to collapse under their weight. Smoke leaked from the chimney in thin, dirty threads that dissipated almost immediately in the dry air. Somewhere inside, a dog barked once and fell silent, as if it knew better than to waste energy. Pete set the brake and grinned at Cordelia, showing teeth that were too yellow, too sharp. "End of the line, miss." Cordelia's throat tightened. "What is this place?" "Your new beginning," Hale said, climbing down from the wagon and brushing dust from his sleeves with slow, deliberate strokes. He twisted the wolf head ring again, that same quick, unconscious motion she had seen 1,000 times. The silver caught the light and threw it back sharp and cold. "You have been difficult, Cordelia. Willful. I can't have that under my roof any longer, and I certainly cannot have it interfering with my business interests. So I have made arrangements for you to work for a respectable family in Silver Spur. They will teach you discipline, teach you what it means to be useful instead of ornamental." The lie was so smooth, it almost sounded true. Almost. But Cordelia had learned to read the spaces between his words and the things he did not say. "You are selling me," Cordelia said, and this time her voice did not shake. It came out flat cold, certain as stone. Hale's expression did not change. He might have been discussing the price of grain. "I am giving you an opportunity to become useful. What you make of it is your concern, not mine. My mother would never have allowed this," Cordelia said, and her voice rose despite her best efforts. "She would have fought you." "Your mother is dead," Hale said, and there was something in his eyes now, something sharp and ugly that he usually kept hidden. "And you will do as I say." Pete grabbed her arm before she could move, hauling her down from the wagon, with a grip that promised bruises on top of bruises. Cordelia twisted, trying to wrench free, but he was too strong, all wiry muscle and mean intent. He dragged her toward the building boots, scuffing through dust, and Hale followed at his own pace, unhurried, as if delivering livestock to market. Inside, the air was thick and sour-smelling of old tobacco and something chemical that burned her nose and throat. 3 men sat at a rough table in the center of the room, cards spread between them, tin cups sweating rings into the wood. They looked up as Pete shoved Cordelia through the door, and one of them, a heavy-set man with a beard like matted wire and eyes too small for his face, set too close together, grinned and pushed his chair back with a scrape that set her teeth on edge. "That her—" His voice was slow, thick, like something dredged from mud. 19 years old. Hale said, his tone businesslike, as if he were selling a horse. "Healthy. Can read and write, do basic sums. she will work hard once she understands there is no other choice. The bearded man stood and circled her slowly, looking her over the way a man might inspect livestock at auction. He reached out with thick, dirty fingers and grabbed her chin, turning her face from side to side. Cordelia jerked back and spat in his eyes. The blow came fast, snapping her head sideways, filling her mouth with a taste of copper. Pete twisted her arm higher, wrenching it behind her back, until the pain made her vision swim, and Cordelia bit down on a scream, refusing to give them the satisfaction. "See?" Hale said calmly, as if nothing had happened. "She needs breaking, but she is clever enough. She will learn given the proper incentive." The bearded man wiped his face with the back of his hand, slow and deliberate eyes, never leaving Cordelia. "Price just went up. $250, or you can take her somewhere else." Hale studied him for a long moment, expression unreadable, then pulled the leather pouch from his coat and counted coins onto the table one by one. The sound of them clinking felt like nails being driven into a coffin lid, final and irrevocable. "Half now," Hale said. "Half when she is delivered to the buyer in Silver Spur." "Fair enough." The bearded man scooped up the coins with hands that were surprisingly quick for their size. Hale pocketed the pouch, twisted the wolf head ring one more time, then turned and walked out, without a backward glance, without a word, as if she had already ceased to exist. "Wait!" Cordelia shouted, lunging forward, but Pete held her fast, his grip like iron. "You cannot just leave me here, you cannot." The door swung shut. The sound of it echoed through the dim room, like a judge's gavel falling, like a coffin lid closing. Pete dragged her toward a back room, narrow and airless, reeking of mildew and old sweat, and something else she could not name. There was a cot against one wall, a bucket in the corner, nothing else. No window, no second door, no way out. He shoved her down onto the cot hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs, and the bearded man stepped into the doorway, blocking the light. "You are mine now," he said, voice low and mean, the kind of voice that enjoyed what it was saying. "You do what I say when I say it, and maybe you live long enough to reach Silver Spur. You give me trouble, and I will make sure you wish you had not. Understand?" Cordelia did not answer. She just stared at him, and something in her gaze, some core of defiance she had not known she possessed, made him step back. "You will learn," he said, and slammed the door. The bolt scraped home with a sound like bones breaking. Cordelia sat on the cot in the darkness and waited for whatever came next. She did not know how long she sat there. Time moved strangely in the dark, stretching and compressing in ways that made her lose track. She heard voices outside, men laughing, the clink of bottles, at the scrape of chairs, but no one came to the door. Her cheek throbbed where the bearded man had struck her, a dull, persistent ache that kept time with her heartbeat, and her wrists ached where Pete had twisted them. But she did not cry. She would not give them that. She folded her hands in her lap and focused on her breathing, slow and steady, the way her mother had taught her when she was small and frightened by thunderstorms. Breathe in. Count to 4. Breathe out. Count to 4. You are still here. You're still alive. That is enough. Then she heard it. A gunshot, sharp and unmistakable, loud enough to make her jump. Cordelia's head snapped up. Shouts followed, angry and confused, then another shot, then the crash of furniture overturning glass, breaking bodies, hitting the floor. She scrambled to her feet and pressed her ear to the door, heart hammering so hard she could barely hear over the sound of her own pulse. The bolt scraped back. The door swung open. A man stood framed in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, long black hair tied back with a strip of leather, face marked with dark streaks, war paint. She realized with a jolt, stark and deliberate. He wore a buckskin shirt, dark with sweat, and dust trousers worn soft, with use a wide-brimmed hat pushed low over his eyes. In his right hand, a revolver, smoke still curling from the barrel. Blood streaked his knuckles. "Come with me." His voice was low, steady, but there was something careful in it, something that told her he understood fear and would not add to it unnecessarily. "Who are you?" Cordelia whispered, her voice hoarse. "Chaska. I am not with them. I came here looking for someone else, but I cannot leave you behind. Not like this. Now please, we need to move. Quickly." She did not hesitate. She grabbed her carpet bag from where Pete had thrown it in the corner and followed him into the main room. The bearded man lay on the floor, clutching his shoulder, groaning low and continuous like an animal. Pete was slumped near the door, a dark stain spreading across his shirt, unconscious or worse, she could not tell and did not want to know. The other men were gone, vanished into the prairie like smoke. Chaska led her outside into the blinding sunlight. A bay horse stood waiting reins, tied loosely to the rail ears, pricked forward alert. He untied them with quick, efficient movements, swung into the saddle with practiced ease, and held out his hand. "Get on." Cordelia took it. His palm was calloused, warm, steady. He pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion, and she wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid reality of him and the warmth of his body through the buckskin shirt. He kicked the horse into a gallop without another word, and they tore away from Tolliver's rest hooves, pounding dust, rising in a cloud behind them. The way station fell away. The prairie opened up ahead, vast and empty, and suddenly impossibly full of terrible hope. "Why did you help me?" Cordelia asked over the thunder of hooves, raising her voice to be heard over the wind that whipped her hair back from her face. Chaska's shoulders tensed, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter, weighted with something she could not quite name. "I came here looking for a man named Hans, a farmer. He hired me 3 weeks ago to guide his family west, his wife, 2 daughters, a son. Good people, careful people. I found his wagon 2 days ago overturned in a gully about 10 miles south of here. Hans was shot dead, left for the buzzards. His family was gone. The tracks led to Tolliver's Rest. When I got there, I saw you being dragged inside. I saw the way they looked at you, the way they talked about you like you were cattle being brought to market. I knew what they were fixing to do. So I made a choice." "What choice?" "To stop it." He paused, and his voice dropped even lower. "I could not save Hans. I could not save his family. They are already sold and moved, scattered across 3 territories by now impossible to track. But I could save you, and that had to be enough." They rode in silence for a while, the horses breathing steady and rhythmic beneath them, the sun beginning its slow descent toward the horizon. Then Chaska spoke again, his voice careful, as if the words cost him something. "I lost my wife and daughter 3 winters back. Sickness swept through our camp like wildfire. There was no medicine, no doctor who would come no way to stop it. Winona died first, then Maka 2 days later. She was 7 years old. I buried them both on a hillside, overlooking a valley where we used to hunt together, where she used to laugh and chase rabbits and ask me questions I could not always answer. I have not been back since." Cordelia felt her throat tighten, felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I am so sorry. That is a grief no one should have to carry alone." Chaska's voice was quiet. "It taught me that the world does not care about fairness. It taught me that if you want to protect someone, you have got to act even when the cost is high, even when you know you might fail. And it taught me that sometimes the only way to honor the people you have lost is to keep fighting for the people who are still here." Cordelia swallowed hard, and when she spoke, her voice was steadier than she expected. "My mother died 11 years ago. The man who brought me to that place, Hale, he married her when I was 8. 6 months later, she was dead. He said it was fever. The doctor said there was nothing to be done. But I remember her shaking her hands, trembling so hard she could not hold a cup, the terror in her eyes, like she knew something I did not. I think he poisoned her. I think he killed her to take her land, a good parcel along the river with water rights and mineral claims. Worth killing for if you are the kind of man who measures everything in dollars and cents. Chaska's jaw tightened. Then we make sure everyone knows what he did. We make sure he pays for it. They rode hard through the afternoon, keeping to the low places where the ground rolled and dipped, staying away from the main trails where Hale's men might be searching. The sun moved across the sky, and the air grew cooler as evening approached, and Cordelia's arms began to ache from holding on. But she did not complain. She was alive. She was free, at least for now. And that was enough. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson and deep purple, Chaska slowed the horse to a walk and turned off the trail, following a narrow creek that wound through a stand of cottonwoods. The trees offered shade and cover, and the sound of running water was the first beautiful thing Cordelia had heard in days. He dismounted in a small clearing where the grass was thick and green, and the water ran clear over smooth stones, and he helped Cordelia down with a hand that lingered just a moment longer than necessary. "We will rest here for a few hours," he said. "The horse needs water, and you need food and sleep. We will ride again after dark when it is harder for anyone to track us." Cordelia nodded, suddenly aware of how hungry she was, how dry her mouth felt, how every muscle in her body ached. Chaska led the horse to the creek and let it drink its fill, then unsaddled it and hobbled it so it could graze. He built a small fire with quick, efficient movements, using dry wood that would not smoke much, and pulled strips of dried meat from his saddlebag. "Here," he said, handing her a piece. "It is not much, but it will keep you going." Cordelia took it and ate, chewing slowly, savoring the salt and the smoke, and the simple fact of being able to eat without fear. Chaska sat across from her, his back against a tree, and watched the darkening prairie with the kind of vigilance that never quite relaxed. He had not holstered the revolver, she noticed. It lay on the ground beside him, close enough to grab if he needed it, clean and ready. "Can I ask you something?" Cordelia said after a while, when the fire had burned down to embers and the stars were beginning to come out overhead, cold and distant. "Reckon you can," Chaska said, and his voice was open, inviting. "What happened to the family you were looking for, Hans and his wife and children? Do you know where they went?" Chaska's expression darkened. "Sold. Scattered. The men who run the flesh trade, and that is what it is, make no mistake, they move fast. By the time I reached Tolliver's Rest, Hans's family was already gone, split up and sent in different directions, so they could not find each other, even if they tried. His wife was probably sent to a mining camp or a saloon, wherever they need women to work. His daughters..." He stopped, jaw tight. "His daughters are young enough to be valuable in ways I do not want to think about. His son might have been sold as labor or apprenticed to someone who will work him until he breaks. The point is to make them disappear, to erase them so completely that even if someone comes looking, there is nothing left to find." Cordelia felt sick. "And Hale is part of this. Hale runs it," Chaska said flatly. "Him and his partners. They have been doing it for years, selling people west like they are livestock, pocketing the money, paying off the law so no one asks questions. Everyone knows, but no one does anything because Hale owns half the county and controls the rest through fear and favors. If you cross him, you disappear. Simple as that." Cordelia looked down at her hands, rough and red from work, and felt a strange kinship with this man she barely knew. They had both lost people they loved. They had both been shaped by grief and survival, and the kind of injustice that ground people down, until there was nothing left but dust. And now they were both fighting for something larger than themselves, something worth the risk. "My mother left me something," Cordelia said quietly. "I think. A doll I had as a child. She gave it to me the night before she died, made me promise to keep it safe. I thought she was just confused from the fever, her mind wandering. But what if she was not? What if she hid something inside the doll? A message or proof of what Hale did?" Chaska looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Where is this doll now?" "The old homestead. The house where we lived before Hale moved us to his ranch after she died. The house burned down. Hale said it was an accident, but I always wondered, but the cellar is still there, stone-lined and deep. I hid the doll there before we left, wrapped it in oilcloth to keep it dry, tucked it into a corner where no one would think to look. I was afraid Hale would throw it away, because it reminded him of her, because he destroyed everything else that connected us to the past. But what if that is exactly why she gave it to me? What if she knew he would not look there because he thought it was just a child's toy?" Chaska nodded slowly. "Then we go there. We find the doll, and we see what your mother left for you." They rode through the night, stopping only once to rest the horse and refill the canteen from a clear spring that bubbled up between rocks. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant, and the prairie stretched out in every direction, empty and silent, except for the occasional cry of a night bird or the rustle of something small moving through the grass. Cordelia dozed fitfully, her head resting against Chaska's back, and she felt the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body against hers, and it was oddly comforting in a way she had not expected. By dawn they reached Whiskey Bend, a sprawling town built along the river in a loose grid of clapboard buildings and rutted streets. The town was just beginning to wake smoke, rising from chimneys, a few early risers moving about their business. Chaska guided the horse down a side street, staying out of sight as much as possible, and stopped in front of a narrow building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Dr. Amelie Ward, Physician." He dismounted, helped Cordelia down, and knocked on the door. It opened almost immediately, as if the woman inside had been expecting them. She was tall and lean, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple dress and an apron stained with what looked like iodine, and she studied them for a moment, taking in Cordelia's torn dress, her bruised face, the exhaustion that clung to her like a second skin, then stepped aside without a word. "Come in," she said, quickly. They stepped inside, and the woman closed the door behind them, throwing the bolt with a solid thunk. The interior of the office was clean and sparse, with a long table covered in bandages and glass vials, a cabinet full of medical instruments that gleamed in the lamplight, and a narrow cot in the corner. The air smelled of carbolic and herbs, sharp and medicinal, but oddly reassuring. "Amelie," Chaska said, "this is Cordelia Hayes. She needs help." Amelie's eyes flicked to Cordelia, and something in her expression softened. She gestured toward a chair. "Sit." Cordelia obeyed, sinking into the chair with a sigh that came from somewhere deep inside. Amelie poured water into a basin, dipped a clean cloth, and began gently cleaning the blood from Cordelia's split lip with hands that were surprisingly gentle. "Tell me what happened." Cordelia told her everything: Hale, the wagon, the way stationed the bearded man, Chaska's intervention. As she spoke, Amelie's expression grew darker, and when Cordelia finished, the doctor let out a long, slow breath and set the cloth aside. "Hale has been running the flesh trade for years." Amelie said, her voice tight with anger that she was clearly trying to control. "Selling women and children west, pocketing the money, paying off the law. Sheriff Arthur Pruitt looks the other way, or rather he helps. They have an arrangement. If you try to report this without proof, solid proof that cannot be ignored or explained away, they will bury you." Literally. You will disappear just like all the others. Cordelia's heart sank. Then what do I do? How do I stop him? Amelie looked at Chaska, then back at Cordelia. You need proof. Something that ties Hale directly to the flesh trade, something documented that he cannot deny. Without that, it is just your word against his, and your word will not be enough. He owns too much, controls too many people. He keeps a ledger. Cordelia said, the memory surfacing suddenly sharp and clear. I saw it once last year. He was working at his desk late at night, and I came in with his supper. He had a big leather-bound book open in front of him, filled with names and numbers entries I did not understand. When I came in, he locked it away in a drawer so fast it was like he had been caught doing something wrong. At the time, I thought it was just business records. But what if it was more than that? What if it was a record of his dealings of the people he sold? Chaska's eyes narrowed. Can you get back into that office, into that drawer? Cordelia hesitated. The thought of going back to Hale's ranch made her stomach turn, but she forced herself to think it through. Maybe. The house is big, and Hale has men watching it, but I know the layout. I know where he keeps things. If we can get inside at night when most of the men are asleep or drunk, I can find the ledger. Then that is what we do, Chaska said. He looked at Amelie. Can you get word to Phineas in Silver Spur? Tell him we might have something big, but he needs to be ready to print fast. Once we have the ledger, we will need to move quickly before Hale realizes what we have done. Amelie nodded. I will send a rider this morning. But you need to be careful, Chaska. If Hale catches you, he will kill you both. And Pruitt. She stopped, her expression troubled. Pruitt is dangerous. More dangerous than Hale in some ways. Hale is cold and calculating, but Pruitt is mean. He enjoys the power. Do not underestimate him. I will not, Chaska said. They waited until nightfall, using the day to rest and plan. Amelie gave Cordelia clean clothes, a simple dress that fit reasonably well, though it was a bit long, and tended to her injuries, applying salve to the bruises and wrapping her wrists with strips of clean cloth. Chaska checked his weapons with the kind of meticulous care that spoke of long experience. He cleaned the revolver, oiled the moving parts, counted his remaining ammunition. He had 12 rounds left, he told Cordelia, which meant they needed to be precise and careful. No wasted shots. No second chances. What if we get caught? Cordelia asked, as they prepared to leave, the sun sinking low and painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Chaska met her eyes, and his expression was calm, but there was something in his gaze, a quiet determination, a willingness to do whatever was necessary to see this through. Then we fight. And if we cannot fight, we run. But we do not give up. I will not let them take you again. I promise you that. Cordelia felt her chest tighten, and she nodded. She wanted to say something, wanted to thank him, wanted to tell him that she trusted him in a way she had not trusted anyone since her mother died. But the words stuck in her throat, so she just nodded and followed him out into the gathering darkness. They left Amelie's office as the sun set, moving through the back streets of Whiskey Bend, where the shadows were deepest and the lamps had not yet been lit. The moon was rising, a thin crescent that gave just enough light to see by without being seen, and the air was cool and dry, carrying the smell of wood smoke and horses and the river that ran through the center of town. They rode in silence, Chaska guiding the horse with practiced ease, and Cordelia found herself studying him in the dim light, the set of his shoulders, the way he moved with the horse, as if they were one, being the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from him, like heat from a fire. After a while, Cordelia spoke, her voice low. Why are you doing this? You do not owe me anything. You could have left me at Amelie's and gone your own way, tried to find Hans's family, or moved on to the next job. Why risk your life for someone you just met? Chaska was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, careful. When I lost Winona and Maka, I felt like the world had ended. I felt like there was no point in going on, no reason to keep fighting. I thought about joining them, about walking into the next river I found and not coming out. But then I realized that the best way to honor them was to keep doing the work they would have wanted me to do, protecting people who cannot protect themselves, helping families who need help, standing up to men like Hale, who think they can do whatever they want because they have money and power. You remind me of Maka in some ways. She was brave even when she was scared. She never gave up, even at the end, when the fever had her. And there was nothing I could do. I see that same strength in you, that same refusal to break. And I want to make sure you have the chance to use it to become whatever you are meant to become. Does that make sense? Cordelia felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, and she blinked them away, not trusting her voice. Instead, she tightened her arms around his waist, just a little. A gesture that said what words could not, and Chaska nodded, once understanding. Hale's ranch appeared on the horizon just after midnight, a cluster of dark buildings silhouetted against the starry sky like a sleeping beast. Chaska slowed the horse and dismounted in a stand of cottonwoods near the creek that marked the western edge of the property, tying the reins to a low branch with a slip knot that could be pulled free in an instant if they needed to run. He helped Cordelia down, and they moved forward on foot, staying low, using the shadows and the irregular terrain for cover. The main house stood dark and silent, but there were lights in the bunkhouse 100 yards away, and Cordelia could hear the low murmur of voices, the occasional burst of laughter. Most of Hale's men would be there, drinking and playing cards, too distracted to notice two figures moving through the darkness. She hoped. Chaska motioned for her to follow, and they crept around the back of the house to the kitchen door. He pulled a thin piece of metal from his pocket, a lockpick, she realized, and worked the lock with quick, practiced movements that spoke of skills learned the hard way. There was a soft click, and the door swung open on well-oiled hinges. They slipped inside, and Chaska closed the door behind them, easing it shut until the latch engaged with barely a sound. The interior of the house was dark, smelling of wood smoke and leather, and something else, something chemical that made Cordelia's nose wrinkle. She led the way through the narrow hallway toward Hale's office. Every creak of the floorboards seeming loud enough to wake the dead, her heart hammering so hard she was sure it could be heard in the next county. But no one came. The house remained silent. Hale's office was at the front of the house, a small room with a heavy oak desk, shelves lined with books and ledgers, a window that looked out onto the yard. Cordelia crossed to the desk and tried the drawers. The top two were unlocked, filled with papers and invoices and correspondence that meant nothing to her. But the bottom drawer was locked tight, the keyhole dark and unforgiving. "Here," Chaska said, handing her the lockpick. "Try this. It is easier than it looks. Most frontier drawers use a simple warded lock. Feel for the metal ward inside, lift it, then twist slow and steady." Cordelia took it with trembling hands and worked the lock, her fingers clumsy with fear and adrenaline. It took longer than she expected, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool night air. But finally, she felt something give and heard a soft click, and the drawer slid open. Inside was the ledger, thick, leather-bound, filled with cramped, coded entries that ran page after page. Cordelia pulled it out and flipped through it quickly, her pulse quickening with each page. Dates, initials, dollar amounts, locations. A map of the flesh trade laid out in careful, incriminating detail. Names she recognized, merchants, ranchers, even a few lawmen alongside payments and notes about deliveries and transfers. But no letter, no receipt for poison, nothing that tied Hale directly to her mother's death. "It is not here," Cordelia whispered, her voice tight with frustration. "The ledger proves the flesh trade, but there is nothing about my mother. Nothing about the poison." Chaska looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Your mother was careful. She would not have left evidence where Hale could find it. She hid it somewhere else. The doll." "The doll," Cordelia repeated, and the dream came flooding back. Her mother pressing it into her hands, making her promise to keep it safe. "We need to go to the old homestead. We need to find it." Chaska grabbed the ledger and stuffed it into his shirt, then turned toward the door. But before they could reach it, it swung open. Hale stood there holding a shotgun leveled at Chaska's chest. "I knew you would come back," he said, his voice as calm and cold as river ice in winter. "You always were predictable, Cordelia. Too sentimental. Too attached to the past. It makes you weak." Chaska raised his revolver, but Hale fired first. The blast was deafening in the small room, a sound that seemed to punch the air itself. The shot went wide deliberately, so punching through the wall and sending splinters flying. But it was close enough to make Chaska dive sideways, dragging Cordelia with him. "Run!" Chaska shouted. They burst through the window in a shower of glass, hit the ground rolling, and came up running. Shouts rose from the bunkhouse. Lanterns flared to life all across the yard like stars falling to earth. Gunfire cracked through the night bullets, whining past their heads, kicking up dirt at their feet. They reached the horse, and Chaska cut the slip knot with his knife, swinging into the saddle and pulling Cordelia up behind him in one fluid motion, born of desperation and practice. He kicked the horse into a full gallop, and they tore across the prairie, the wind howling in their ears, the night swallowing them whole. Behind them, Hale's voice rang out cold and commanding. "After them, I want them alive, if you can manage it, but dead will do just fine. Do not let them leave my land." They rode hard through the night and into the next day, pushing the horse to its limits. The posse stayed closer than Cordelia would have thought possible, and she could hear the thunder of hooves behind them, could see the distant flicker of lanterns bobbing in the darkness like malevolent fireflies. Chaska used every trick he knew, doubling back to confuse the trail-crossing streams, to hide their scent, cutting through dense brush where the horses could barely pass. But Hale's men were relentless, driven by fear of their employer and the promise of reward. On the second day, as the sun climbed toward noon, and the heat became oppressive, they reached a wide river swollen from recent rains in the mountains. The current was fast and dangerous, churning brown with silt, and Cordelia could see debris swirling in the water branches, a dead cow, something that might have been part of a wagon. "We have to cross," Chaska said, his voice tight. "It is the only way to lose them for good. The current will scatter our trail, and most of Hale's men are not strong enough swimmers to follow." Cordelia looked at the river, her heart sinking. "Can the horse make it?" "I do not know," Chaska said honestly, and there was something in his voice, a hint of doubt, of fear, that made her stomach clench. "But we do not have a choice. If we stay on this side, they will run us down within the hour. At least the river gives us a chance." He guided the horse into the water, and immediately the current grabbed them, pulling them sideways, dragging them downstream faster than the horse could compensate. The animal struggled, kicking hard eyes, rolling white with fear, and Chaska held the reins tight, guiding it toward the far bank with strength born of desperation. Cordelia clung to his waist, the cold water soaking through her clothes, numbing her legs, and for a terrifying moment, she thought they would be swept away. Thought she would drown here in this nameless river and never see her mother's land again. But Chaska was strong, and the horse was brave, and inch by agonizing inch, they fought their way across. When they finally reached the far bank, the horse scrambled up the muddy slope and stood there, trembling flanks heaving, and Cordelia collapsed forward against Chaska's back, gasping for breath, her whole body shaking with cold and fear and relief. Behind them, she heard shouts and the splash of horses entering the water. She looked back and saw two riders lose their seats as the current caught them, saw them swept downstream, arms flailing, horses screaming. One man managed to grab onto a floating log. The other disappeared beneath the churning water and did not surface. The rest of the posse hesitated on the far bank, and Chaska used the moment to kick the horse into motion again. By the time Hale's men found a safer crossing point miles downstream, Chaska and Cordelia had vanished into the hills, leaving nothing but muddy hoofprints that the next rain would wash away. They reached the ruins of the old homestead at dusk on the third day, both of them exhausted, filthy, running on nothing but willpower and fear. The house was gone, burned to blackened timbers and ash weeds growing up through the foundation, the chimney standing like a broken tooth against the darkening sky. But the cellar entrance was still there, a rectangle of shadow, half covered with fallen boards and creeping vines. Cordelia climbed down into the darkness, her heart pounding, and the air below was cool and damp, smelling of earth and rot and old ghosts. She searched the corners with hands that shook, feeling along the stone walls, and finally found it, the rag doll still wrapped in oilcloth that had kept it dry all these years, tucked into the corner just where she had left it. She pulled it free and climbed back up into the fading light. Chaska was standing, watch revolver in hand, scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. She sat down on a fallen beam and carefully unwrapped the oilcloth, her fingers clumsy with anticipation and dread. The doll was just as she remembered, button eyes, one hanging loose on a thread yarn hair, a dress made from scraps of calico. She turned it over, felt along the seams, and found one that had been re-sewn with different thread, newer and tighter than the rest. She tore it open. Inside, folded tight and protected from the damp, was a letter. Her mother's handwriting, shaky but clear. If anyone finds this, know the truth. Roland Hale is poisoning me. I do not know why, but I suspect it is for the land, the river parcel that belonged to my father, and the one with water rights and mineral claims that Hale has always coveted. I am writing this while I still have strength to hold a pen. He brings me tea every morning. Sweet tea, he says, will help my fever, but I grow weaker with each cup. I tried to refuse, but he forces me, holds my jaw, and pours it down my throat like I am a child or a dog. I am afraid for my daughter. Please protect her. Do not let him keep her. She deserves better than this. I have hidden the receipt for the poison he purchased, rat powder, from an apothecary named Silas Brennan, who comes through town twice a year, inside the lining of Cordelia's Sunday dress, the blue one with the white collar that she wears to church. He will not think to look there. He never pays attention to her clothes. Please, whoever finds this, use it to stop him. Do not let him do this to anyone else. Anna Hayes. Cordelia's hands shook so hard she nearly dropped the letter. Tears blurred her vision, hot and unstoppable, and she pressed the paper to her chest, feeling the weight of 11 years of grief and rage and unanswered questions finally given voice and shape and proof. Cordelia. Chaska's voice, urgent from above. We need to move. They found us. She looked up and saw riders on the ridge, 6 of them, maybe more, moving fast through the gathering darkness. Hale was at the front, his face a pale blur in the fading light, and even from this distance she could feel the weight of his rage, like a physical thing. The dress, Cordelia said, breathless, scrambling to her feet. My mother hid the receipt in my Sunday dress. The blue one. It is still at the ranch in my old room, unless Hale destroyed it. Chaska's jaw tightened. We cannot go back there. Not now. Not with them on our heels. We go to Silver Spur. We give Phineas the ledger and the letter. It is enough to start an investigation, enough to bring in the U.S. Marshal. We can worry about the receipt later. There is a canyon 2 miles east. Chaska said, looking at the approaching riders, calculating distances and angles with the practiced eye of someone who had done this before. If we can reach it before they cut us off, we might lose them in the rocks. But we need to ride hard. Right now. They mounted and rode the horse, laboring beneath their combined weight, exhaustion making it stumble. Gunfire echoed across the plains, sharp and deadly. A bullet whined past Cordelia's ears so close she felt the heat of its passage. Another kicked up dirt at the horse's hooves, making it shy and nearly throw them both. They reached the canyon and plunged into its shadows, the walls rising high on either side, narrow and twisting like a serpent's path. Chaska guided the horse deeper, following instinct and memory, looking for cover, looking for a way out. He finally stopped in a place where the canyon widened slightly, where boulders offered some protection, and dismounted. "Take the horse," he said, handing Cordelia the reins, his voice calm but urgent. "Follow the canyon east. There is a way out about a mile ahead, a narrow gap that opens onto flat ground. Go to Silver Spur. Find Phineas at the Gazette. Give him the ledger and the letter. Tell him everything." "What about you?" Cordelia asked, her voice breaking. "I will slow them down. Buy you time to get clear." "No," Cordelia said, and the word came out fierce, desperate. "I will not leave you. Not after everything." Chaska cupped her face in his hands, and his eyes were calm, filled with something she was afraid to name, afraid to hope for. "You have to. This is bigger than me, bigger than both of us. People need to know the truth about Hale, about what he has done. You are the one who can make that happen. You are stronger than you know, Cordelia. Now go, please." Before Cordelia could argue, gunfire erupted at the canyon entrance, sharp and echoing, and Chaska turned and moved back toward the sound revolver drawn. Cordelia stood frozen, torn between running and staying, between survival and something else she could not name. Then she heard Chaska shout a sound of pain, sudden and sharp, and she could not leave. She tied the horse to a scrub oak with trembling hands, ran back, heart hammering. She found Chaska crouched behind a boulder, blood streaming from his left shoulder, his face pale with pain. The posse was advancing, using the rocks for cover, moving in with the confidence of men who knew they had their prey cornered. "I told you to go," Chaska said through gritted teeth, his voice tight. "I do not take orders," Cordelia said, and grabbed his revolver from where it lay beside him on the ground. Her hands shook, but she raised the gun the way he had taught her during their brief rest stops, feet planted, arms, steady, sights aligned on the target. She fired. The shot went wide, ricocheting off a rock with a whine like an angry wasp, but it made the nearest rider duck behind cover. Chaska stared at her, stunned pain, momentarily forgotten. "Reload," he said, his voice hoarse. "Like I showed you. Half-cock the hammer, open the loading gate, work the ejector rod, and feed fresh cartridges in one chamber at a time." Cordelia's hands fumbled with the mechanism, but she managed it, muscle memory from his lessons taking over where conscious thought failed. She fired again, and this time the bullet struck a rider's horse in the shoulder. The animal reared, screaming, and threw its rider to the ground hard enough that he did not get up. The posse hesitated, confusion rippling through their ranks. They had not expected resistance, had not expected a woman to fight back. Chaska pulled himself upright with a grunt of pain, favoring his wounded shoulder, and fired 3 quick shots with his left hand, each one finding its mark with grim precision. 2 men fell. Another scrambled back behind cover, shouting for reinforcements. Then a figure appeared on a ledge above them, Hale himself, rifle in hand, face twisted with fury. He had climbed up while they were distracted, had found the high ground, and now he had a clear shot at both of them. He aimed the rifle at Chaska, and Cordelia saw his finger tighten on the trigger. She screamed and threw herself forward, and the shot went wide, striking the boulder with a spray of rock chips that stung her face. Hale chambered another round. With a smooth, practiced motion, his face a mask of cold determination. "You should have stayed sold, girl. Would have been easier for everyone. But you always were stubborn, just like your mother." Cordelia raised the revolver. Her hands were steady now, rock steady, all fear burned away by something hotter and purer. Time seemed to slow. She could see every detail with painful clarity, the wolf head ring on Hale's finger glinting in the last light of day. The way his eyes narrowed as he took aim. The small, satisfied smile that played at the corners of his mouth. She fired. The bullet hit Hale in the chest, dead center, punching through his shirt and the flesh beneath with a sound like a hammer striking wet leather. He staggered backward, eyes going wide with shock and something that might have been disbelief, as if he could not quite comprehend. That this girl, this property he had tried to sell, had just killed him. His rifle clattered from his hands, and he fell from the ledge, body, tumbling arms, windmilling uselessly. He hit the canyon floor with a sickening thud and did not move. Cordelia stood there, the gun's still raised smoke curling from the barrel. Her whole body was trembling now, shaking with exhaustion and fear and something else, something that felt like a dam breaking inside her. Chaska pulled himself to his feet with visible effort, wincing, and put a hand on her shoulder. "It is done." Cordelia lowered the gun slowly, as if her arms weighed 100 pounds each. "Is he dead?" Chaska looked down at Hale's body, sprawled and broken on the rocks below, and nodded. "Yes, he is dead." The remaining posse members scattered, unwilling to fight without Hale's money and authority backing them. Within minutes, the canyon was empty, except for the bodies and the echoes of gunfire fading into silence. But their trouble was not over. They reached Silver Spur 2 days later. Chaska pale and weak from blood loss, Cordelia holding him upright in the saddle, both of them running on fumes and sheer stubbornness. She found the Gazette office and half-carried Chaska inside, where a thin, hungry-looking man with ink-stained fingers looked up from his press with startled eyes. "Phineas?" Cordelia asked. "That is me. Who are you?" "Cordelia Hayes. Emily sent word. We have proof." She handed him the ledger and her mother's letter, and Phineas read them both with growing intensity, his eyes widening with each line. When he finished, he looked up at her with something like awe. "This is everything I have been looking for," he said. "This is enough to bring down Hale's entire operation, enough to force the U.S. Marshal to act. I can have this printed by tomorrow morning." "Do it," Cordelia said. "Do it now." Phineas worked through the night, and by dawn the first edition of the Silver Spur Gazette was ready, a single sheet front and back, with bold headlines, "Flesh Trade Exposed." Hale's empire built on poison and greed. Victim's mother wrote warning from her deathbed. Cordelia read it with shaking hands and felt hope flicker to life in her chest. But that hope nearly died when Sheriff Arthur Pruitt rode into town at noon with a dozen armed men, a warrant for Cordelia's arrest clutched in his fist, his face a mask of cold fury. "Cordelia Hayes." Pruitt's voice echoed down the main street, bringing people to their windows and doors. "You are under arrest for the murder of Roland Hale. Come out now, and maybe I will let you live long enough to hang proper." Cordelia stepped into the street, and that was when she saw it. As Pruitt dismounted, swinging down from his horse with the easy grace of a man who had done it 10,000 times, sunlight caught on his left hand. A silver ring, wolf head, identical to the one Hale had worn, identical down to the snarling teeth and empty eyes. Cordelia's blood turned to ice. She understood now with perfect, terrible clarity. Brothers. They had been brothers all along. The arrangement Emily had mentioned was not just corruption. It was family. It was blood. You protected him, Cordelia said, her voice shaking with fury. You helped him sell those people. Your own brother. You knew what he was doing, and you let it happen. Pruitt's face went hard as stone. He was my brother, my blood, and you murdered him in cold blood. Now you are going to pay for it. But before he could draw his gun, people began pouring into the street. They had read the Gazette. They had seen the ledger entries, had read Anna Hayes's letter, had recognized names, their own names, the names of their sisters and daughters and wives, who had vanished without a trace. And they were angry. Hale sold my sister, a man shouted from the crowd. He poisoned Anna Hayes. A woman screamed, her voice breaking. You let him do it, Pruitt. You took his money and looked the other way while he destroyed families. My cousin disappeared 5 years ago. Was that in the ledger too? The crowd swelled, growing larger by the moment, anger spreading like wildfire. Pruitt's men began to back toward their horses, hands on their guns, but clearly outnumbered, clearly afraid of what would happen if they opened fire on a mob this size. Pruitt stared at Cordelia, fury and fear warring in his eyes. And for a moment, she thought he might try to shoot her anyway. Might decide that killing her was worth dying for. But then his gaze shifted to the crowd, to the dozens of faces filled with rage and grief, and something in him broke. He turned and mounted his horse, his movements jerky and graceless. This is not over, he said, but his voice shook and everyone heard it. Yes, Cordelia said, stepping forward, her voice ringing clear and strong. It is. Your brother is dead. His operation is exposed. And if you try to stop us, these people will tear you apart. Because they know the truth now, and the truth does not go away just because you want it to. Pruitt stared at her for a long moment, then jerked his horse's head around and rode out of town at a gallop. His men followed, and they did not come back. The U.S. Marshal arrived a week later, summoned by Phineas's article, and a flood of complaints from families demanding justice. He was a gray-haired man, named Foster, methodical and thorough. And he brought deputies and a U.S. attorney who looked at the ledger and the letter and the growing pile of testimony with grim satisfaction. Pruitt was arrested on charges of corruption and complicity in the flesh trade. Hale's ranch was seized, his assets frozen pending investigation. The investigation spread like cracks in ice, uncovering networks that reached into 3 territories, touching judges and merchants and lawmen who had all profited from the misery of others. Families began to come forward, naming names, demanding answers, seeking justice for loved ones who had been lost. Cordelia took her mother's land patent, the one Anna had owned before she married Hale, the river parcel, with water rights and mineral claims, and rode to the territorial capital with Marshal Foster to have it certified. The governor himself reviewed the documents, declared them valid and binding, and stamped them with his official seal. The land was hers free and clear, and no one could contest it. She also returned to Hale's ranch one final time, escorted by the marshal's men, and retrieved her old Sunday dress from the room where she had once slept. The blue one with the white collar, folded neatly in a trunk that had not been opened in years. She carried it outside into the sunlight and carefully cut open the hem with a paring knife she borrowed from the cook. Inside, sewn carefully into the lining with tiny patient stitches, was a receipt written in faded ink on yellowed paper. Received payment of $2.50 for 1 tin of rat powder arsenic sold to Mr. Roland Hale for pest control. Silas Brennan, traveling apothecary. The date was 3 days before Anna Hayes's death. Cordelia handed it to Marshal Foster without a word, and he folded it carefully and put it in his coat pocket. "This seals it," he said quietly. "With this and your mother's letter and the ledger, we have everything we need. Hale would have hanged if he had lived long enough to stand trial. You did the world a favor, Miss Hayes. Cordelia nodded, but did not speak. She did not feel triumphant. She just felt tired. Spring came, and Cordelia stood on the riverbank of her mother's land, watching the water run fast and clear. The winter rains had washed the prairie clean, and new grass was pushing up through the old tender and green and full of promise. Chaska had stayed his shoulder healed, though he still favored it on cold mornings. They worked side by side, planting crops, mending the old fences her grandfather had built, raising the frame of a new house on the foundation of the one that had burned. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned gold and crimson and deep purple, Chaska came and stood beside her at the river's edge. He did not speak. He did not need to. They had learned each other's silences, had learned to communicate in the spaces between words. Cordelia reached out slow and deliberate and took his hand. His palm was warm, calloused, scarred from 100 small injuries earned through hard work and harder living. He held her hand with the same steady strength he brought to everything else, and they stood there together watching the river flow. "Do you think we will ever be safe?" Cordelia asked, her voice quiet. Chaska looked at her, and his expression was open, honest. "Safe is not the same as free, but yes, I think we will be both. We fought for it. We earned it with blood and fear and choices that cost us. And now it is ours." Cordelia turned to him, and when their eyes met, there was no fear, no hesitation. Just trust earned through survival and sacrifice, and the kind of intimacy that comes from facing death together and choosing to live anyway. "Will you stay?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Chaska's answer was simple and honest. "Yes, for as long as you will have me. For as long as the river runs." They stood there together, the water flowing at their feet, the land stretching out before them like a promise. And Cordelia felt something she had not felt since her mother died. Not happiness. Happiness was too simple a word, too bright and uncomplicated. But peace. Hard-won, blood-bought, fiercely earned. The kind of peace that comes only after you have looked into the abyss and refused to fall. In the distance, she could see the frame of the new house rising against the sky, raw wood and clean lines, and the smell of sawdust on the wind. And closer at her feet, she saw something else, a small green shoot pushing up through the ash and burned earth where the old house had stood. Life returning. Growth from destruction. A beginning rising from an ending. She squeezed Chaska's hand once, and he squeezed back, and that was enough. That was everything. The end.